Ben Wagner is an assistant professor for Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management at Delft University of Technology. He joins us now live from Vienna. So, Ben, it seems quite clear that in these countries in particular, what the governments have a problem with are the people who oppose them. Do they have legs to stand on that Twitter is doing something wrong here?
I think these are governments who are trying to push Twitter into doing things in a very authoritarian way. And the way in which they're trying to do that is guised under these sorts of statements or symbols of we're using the law, it's important for our sovereignty, it's important to protect users from things that are being done wrong in these platforms. But when you look at the actual statements and the actual context which is taking place, it's very frequently the case that these bans take place or these actions take place when there's either an election taking place, when government ministers or government actors are criticized for doing things on Twitter. And so it's relatively clear that this is an attempt to gain power over these platforms and influence the politics of those platforms rather than trying to make them more law-abiding.
So at times, Twitter has complied with what the government wants, these governments want it to do in banning some accounts or restricting users like rappers and singers. El Fresh the Lion and Jazzy B have been limited by Twitter. However, at the same time, Twitter has spoken up for free speech. It's pushed back on the governments in some respects. But walking this delicate line in countries that are moving away from free speech, is that sustainable for Twitter?
I think it's important that it remains sustainable and they keep walking that line and pushing harder. Because without the freedom of expression, what's the point of using Twitter? Without the basis that you're able to communicate and not be concerned about which accounts are going to disappear or be deleted, there is no point in using these systems. At the same time, you of course have to acknowledge there is a problem with governance here, because the governance of social media platforms remains relatively vague and opaque in much regard. And so we need a lot more transparency and accountability there in order to ensure that companies and governments alike are not just pulling their weight, but they're doing what's in users and in human rights' best interest.
So we're talking about tens of millions of users in each of these two countries that we mentioned, Nigeria and India. Is this bad for Twitter's business? Does it pose a threat to Twitter as it expands or attempts to expand throughout the world?
So I don't think the main concern in this news story is Twitter's growth or Twitter's business model. I think the main concern should be the users' rights. And of course, there's a question of how long, if Twitter were, let's say, not profitable as a result of this or losing money from this, that there would be serious considerations there. But I don't think that should be the focus of it. I really think that there's a sustainable business model to be made from protecting human rights, from building platforms that promote and protect speech, but also from governing them in a way that supports their users and supports human rights. It doesn't have to take away from these aspects, and it doesn't just have to support authoritarian tendencies of governments. There is a different way.
Absolutely, Ben. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.